Hi, this is David Orlofsky, and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Whether you're watching with our friends over at Any Time, or wherever you watch or listen to your podcast, we are so happy to have you along for this adventure. I just got such a beautiful email from somebody else who discovered the show and talked about how much chizuk they get from it. And what can I tell you? That's such a meaningful thing to me, to know that you can share ideas that add to people's lives. I don't know if I ever told this story. I feel like I told the story. I'm in an age where I'm entitled to tell the same story again. Yeah. I give a share every other Motzi Shabbos in Har Nov. At least I did before Corona. And there was a time when I was just too busy. I just had too many things. I had a tekufa in my life when I used to leave my house at 6:40 in the morning, come back 10:15 at night. Then I first had phone calls and emails and things like that, and it was just too busy. So I was going to cut it out because it takes time to prepare. I would say every other week, a parsha share for an hour on a new topic that I had not spoken about before. And just get up and talk for an hour. I know I make it look so easy, but it's not so easy. And especially if I'm going to cover all of the obligations that I want to have in the course of shir, which I want to say a chiddush. I used to have people who were real, often Talmidei Chachamim, who were coming to listen. It's got to be practical, because it's got to be practical. It's got to be inspiring. When people come on a Motzi Shabbos here in Eretz Yisrael, that's our entire Saturday night. We don't have a Sunday here. Sunday's a regular day. So someone who's sharing their entire Saturday night, it's got to be something that's inspiring. And it's got to be entertaining. Yeah, Torah should be entertaining. It should be something that's enjoyable. So put all those elements together and talk for an hour. It takes a lot of time to prepare. I didn't spend a lot of time, but it takes a lot of time. Yeah? So anyway, I was looking for things to cut out, and I was going to cut out this year. And a friend of mine took me to Moshe Shapiro, and he says, listen, if there's anything today that gives chizuk to people, it's the most important thing. It's more important than anything else. So I said, but I have so many other obligations. He says, I know, I feel bad. You have to get rid of some of them. So I gave up a few of my children, but I hope they're happy. But anyway, just kidding. But, you do something that gives chizuk. And I have to say that the thousands of people who watch this podcast, there are very few venues that I've had where I speak to that many people. In fact, if my numbers are correct, I've never spoken to that many people who in one place as I can reach with the podcast, especially when people listen to it over, different times and things. It's remarkable. Anyway, this episode is sponsored anonymously as a schus for shidduchim of the Dovid family, Emertz Hashem. As I've mentioned in the past, I am a Kohen. I'm part of the union, and I give you my own personal bracha that everyone should be able to find their zibug, the karov, find the right one. It should be able to go well. And I guess maybe we'll talk about dating. I don't know, some point. You get stuck in a series, and then you have other things you might want to talk about in your series, which is where I am right now. I've been speaking about Aliya, and just to review, the reason I'm speaking about this is because with the deteriorating situation, particularly in America, as well as for Jews in Europe, South America, other places, there are, so they say, tens of thousands of Jews who are considering moving to Eretz Yisrael. And as I said at the very beginning, Rabbi Leff said that he went to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, and they both told him the future of Klal Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael. Having said that, it's a difficult decision. Difficult decision. And I know that there have been people who have been upset at me as I have raised some of the problems. But listen, the way we Jews make decisions is by creating conflict. I don't know if I've ever told this story. I was teaching in Or Samech at the time. And I come to the class and you can feel the tension. There's a lot of tension. And I walk in and I hadn't even thought it. Usually, I have to say something before there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of tension in them. And people say, ask him. So the guy says, Rabbi, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. He says, I heard that if a Jew if a Jew is drowning and a non-Jew is drowning, you save the Jew. Yeah. I said, okay. Obviously, when you have to make decisions, the idea has to do with mitzvahs. There's a value to mitzvahs in the world. A Jew has more mitzvahs than a non-Jew, and that's the reason. So he says, so if some Jew that I don't know is drowning, and my father is drowning, I have to let my father die? I said, okay, let's take a deep breath. I said, let me tell you another Gemara. It says, if your father is drowning, who's a Jew, your father's drowning and your Rebbe is drowning, who do you save? You save your Rebbe. Why? Because your father brings you into this world, but your Rebbe brings you into the next world. Now, I know some fathers who've been upset about this. And I said to them, how often do you think this happens? I said, if you're about to get on a boat, check the roster. See if your son's Rebbe's there. If it is, take the next boat. How often does this come up? I said, but we create conflict. That's what the Gemara does. Because the only way you can make decisions is by creating conflict. I always say when I was running NCSY on Long Island, I had to make a lot of decisions. I don't like making decisions. No, it's not really fair. There are some decisions I like to make. So there's a caterer whose food is excellent, he's inexpensive and reliable. And there's another caterer, his food is crummy, he's unreliable, and he's more expensive. I like those decisions. Yeah, so I know which one to choose. But sometimes you have to choose between one person whose food was not so good, but he wasn't expensive and he was reliable. There's another guy who had much better food, but he was unreliable and he was more expensive. So you have to make a decision. Right? Where Seinfeld says, you go to the drugstore. This one's fast acting, but this one's long lasting. When do I want to feel better, now or later? You got to make decisions. So the Gemara creates conflict, even though it may never happen, right? Why? Just in order for you to understand values. What's more important, this world or the next world? So they want to show you that the next world is more important. And therefore, if you have a choice between your Rebbe and your father, you save your Rebbe, even though I don't know if this has ever happened in human history. But the way you make decisions is by creating conflict. You have to create conflict. Yeah. So, so in absolute terms, what's more important, living in Eretz Yisrael or learning Torah? That's an easy one. That's an easy one. Because it says you're allowed to leave Israel in order to learn Torah. And people would go from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel in order to learn Torah. So learning Torah is definitely a greater value. Is full-time learning for everybody? It's not for everybody. I learned the Chavetz Chaim and Rav Henoch, the Rosh Hashiva, would sometimes call in somebody and say, "You're a nice guy, Avazallah Aleich. So go out, get a job in Habatzas HaTorah, teach, get a job in elementary school, but you're not going to make it entire. So for you to sit here and learn full time is not for you. So if you say everybody has to just sit and learn full time, you're being unrealistic. There can't be one size fits all for everybody. Masel Shiurim says this at the beginning of Precious, where he says it's impossible to make one standard for everybody. There are different types of people with different types of challenges. You have to be real. So if a person wants to sit and learn, there was a time when I used to teach in seminary, I seriously messed up these girls. It was terrible. They would go out on a date with a boy, and he says, I want to learn full time. I want to learn long term. I'm going to be a long-term learner. And they'd say, why? Because, you're supposed to learn, Well, are you hoping to become a yeshiva? Is this where you want to go? Is this, I don't know, want to learn because that's what you do. Because, as I have said too many times, everybody does what everybody does because that's what everybody does. But to stop and think, why? So too, Eretz, absolute value. No question about it. You got to be real. Got to be real. I said over Rabbi Bowman and from Rabbi Orlofsky where they would say that if you have older children, you shouldn't come. I say it depends. Not that I'm a bar plukta, but it depends on the situation. But I understand what they're saying because I've seen kids, nice, settled kids who were in their schools in America, and then they suddenly transfer over here. They don't have any friends. They don't speak the language. The culture is not the same, and suddenly they're at the bottom, whereas they were towards the top. It's a wrenching thing. Yeah. So what's my point? My point is it's a consideration. If it works out, it's gewaltig. And I've gotten different responses from this series. Certain people said, thank you so much for dealing with this topic so honestly and candidly. It helps me to make my decision better. And some people said, I realized that I really wanted to do this, but I realized based on the considerations that you're raising, at this point, our family's just not going to be able to handle it. Okay. So have your eyes open when you're making a decision. Like I say, you have to, whatever it is, do it by thinking. Soif ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. The end of everything that is an action, first you have to think about it. I'm sure I told this story. It's one of my favorites. I was at a Shabbaton someplace, and the person said to me, this is a very successful Shabbaton. It was just before Mincha, Shabbos Mincha. I said, really, why? He says, well, we brought a lot of students together, and they're all having a great time. I said, was the purpose of the Shabbaton to bring a lot of students together and give them a great time? And he thinks and he says, what should be the purpose of a Shabbaton? I said, Shabbos Mincha is the wrong time to make that decision. That you decide before you make the Shabbaton. Why am I making the Shabbaton? What's my goal? What am I trying to accomplish? Go to the end. Still Shalom Perek Gimel says this world is like a maze. You know how you cheat in a maze? You go to the end, work your way backwards, and you can cheat. Figure out where you're going. So like I say, so I want to finish up this series, not because there's not more to say, but, some of the criticism I've received is you're not an expert. You've been here for 32 years, but situations have changed. The person is making Aliya today. There's other considerations. There are organizations dedicated to this, and they're right. I thought of having some people on and having them speak, and then I realized what for. Go to them directly. You can look up which organizations there are. Maybe we'll include a few links. But, go speak to the people who are involved today and get all the information, or as we say here in Hebrew, informatia. Yeah. If you're worried about speaking Hebrew, don't worry, it's getting easier. Yeah. So I want to end with the series with something that might seem a little technical, but I think is important. Even if you don't make Aliyah, it's important just to have an understanding. And I would like to explain the political system over here in Israel. I'm addressing myself to Americans. I have a regular person who watches in Switzerland and says, I feel like your podcast is not being aimed mostly to the Swiss. And that is for sure true, because my friend Y.Y. Rubenstein, he told me he was invited to speak in Switzerland. And when he got there, they said, but you know, in Switzerland, rabbis do not tell jokes. Now, I have to tell you, YY is one of the funniest people out there. He's hysterically funny. And I've always felt like, sometimes they advertise me to speak and they say, the world's funniest rabbi. And I say, no, really, he should get that title. The difference is I can't stop it. I don't know how to speak completely straight. I can. And the truth is I've gotten better at it. But, little jokes just tend to ooze out of me. What can I do? It says something about, I guess, my approach to life. But he can be totally straight, So I don't know how. It's a little hard for me. But I do refer you to my 2 Tisha B'Av videos. They may be helpful. But otherwise, yeah, I'm going to be addressing myself mostly to the United States. Let me explain to you the way things work in the United States. In the Continental Congress, they hammered out an amazing concept that had never been done before. Hard to find where it's ever been done since. And that is the following. There's a constitution. Yeah. Lahavdil, Torah Shebiksav. And this says, okay, this is what we all agree to. These are the basic principles upon which the United States is based, and you can amend it. You can add amendments. The Bill of Rights are amendments that were added on. Yeah. Amendments. The right to free speech, the right to bear arms, the freedom of religion, all these different kind of things. And you can add more amendments, you can change the amendments. You need a majority of the states to agree, but that was the idea. And then they said, okay, we're going to have a legislative body. So the large states said, good, we'll go by population. The small states said, that we won't be represented. I'm not going to join your union. So they came up with 2 houses. They had the Senate, where every state, whether you're California, New York, and Texas, and Florida with a lot of people, or whether you're Wyoming without so many people, everybody gets 2 senators. Yeah. And then a House of Representatives based on population. And things have to go through the 2 houses. They may pass laws, and the laws may not be clear. Do they fit in with the Constitution or not? Do they go against one of the constitutional principles? So they set up a court system, the Supreme Court, who is only there to decide whether or not what you're doing is in keeping with the Constitution or not keeping with the Constitution. At least theoretically, that's how it's supposed to work. And then they made an executive, right, corresponding to the king. So in England, they had a king and they had a parliament, and there was a House of Lords and there was the House of Parliament, the Common House, and there was a certain thing, but the king had certain powers. So here they have it as a president. And the president has certain executive powers. And the idea was to set up a balance of powers. But over everything was the Constitution. And if you didn't like the Constitution, then you had to make, constitutional Congress, change them, you need a majority of the states, etc. So that's how everything works. You know how things work. It goes to the House, it goes to the Senate. They each have a bill, and you have to try to put the 2 bills together. The president can veto it, and then the Congress can override his veto, and then they could say this wasn't legal, and then you can go to the Supreme Court, and that's all balanced. Israel doesn't have a constitution. All they have is what's called the parliamentary system. 120 seats in the Knesset. They based it on the Anshe Knesset Hagdola, the Men of the Great Assembly, which was made up of 120 scholars and prophets. This Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament, is made up of neither scholars nor prophets. Yeah, there's a lot of politics that go on over there. It can sometimes be very acrimonious. There's a famous story. They tell it a lot. I notice when tours come here, they always tell the story over. The story of the two brothers. The two brothers shared a field. And one brother was single, and the other one had a lot of children. And the deal was they worked the field, and then they would split everything up at the end of the day. And so the brother who had a lot of children said, my brother has nothing. It's just him. Who's going to take care of him in his old age? So he would take some of his, grain and bring it over to his brother's side at night. And the brother who was single said, I don't have any expenses. My brother has a lot of children. And so he would bring some of his grain over to the other side. And every day they ended up with the same amount. Couldn't understand what's happening. And one night the two brothers met in the middle of the field, and they realized what was happening, and they embraced. And on that place was built the Beis HaMikdash. That's the story. Rabbi Josh Hartman, who is best known for his works on the Maharal, said that story is of Christian origin. There is no such a medrash. The whole thing is a Christian story. It's not true. So I told this over once, and someone said to me, but there is a story that is true. I said, really? He says, yeah, there were two brothers, and they shared a field. And one brother had a lot of children, and the other one had nobody. So the brother who had nobody said, my brother, he gets half, the same as me. I have nobody to take care of me in the old age. So every night he would go over and steal some of the wheat from his brother. And the brother who had all the children said, that selfish dog, he has no expenses. And we're supposed to put it 50%. And every night he would go over and steal some of his brother's wheat. And surprisingly, in the morning, they had the same amount. And one night they met in the middle, and they realized what was happening, and they beat each other up. And on that spot, they built the Knesset. Now, I don't know if that story is any truer than the first story is. But what it means is that the Knesset has a lot of acrimony in it. Now, here's the thing. There is no executive branch. There's no president. There is a president of the state of Israel. He could do pardons. He could do certain other things, but it's mostly a ceremonial position. Theoretically, if I have 61 seats, I can do anything I want. Anything I want. I've pointed this out many times that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a sense of humor. And there was an election between Perez and Netanyahu after Rabin was killed. And it was so tight. The exit polls declared Perez the winner by 0.4%. Now, come on, there's a margin of error. And the Labour Party started celebrating, and they were, yeah. And I heard that night they interviewed Yael Dayan from the Labour Party. And they said, listen, you have to recognize at least half the country is against you. She said, the way it works in Israel is, if I have one more vote, I can do anything I want, and I don't have to take you into account at all. Scary, but true. Anyway, after they counted all the votes, it ended up that Netanyahu won by 0.5%. And later in that day, I heard them interviewing Yael Dayan again, and she said, Netanyahu has to remember that almost half the country voted against him. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a sense of humor, right? And that's why if everybody hadn't attacked Justice Kavanaugh, and believe all women, believe all women. And then when accusations came out against Joe Biden, they said, well, you can't just believe anybody, you need proof. This is a juxtaposition that creates humor. It's always that way, yeah? So it's the contrasts. So it's a parliamentary system. And you do not vote for a person, you vote for a party. Now, in the United States, there are two parties. There are smaller parties, but of course, they don't really have much of a chance of getting into Congress. You might have an independent here and there. But for the most part, you're either going to be a Democrat or a Republican. In England, there's 3 or 4 parties. That's it. There's the Labour Party, and there's the Tories, and there's, I think, the Liberal Party, and I think the Social Democrats. I may be wrong. But that's it. So, 3, 4 parties, 2 major parties, 2 smaller parties. In Israel, it works like this. They had to pass a law that you have to meet a certain minimum threshold or you can't get in. Why? Because every 2 people made their own party. There have been, in the past, the taxi driver party, which they were running on a platform of protecting the rights of taxi drivers. There was the Pensioners Party, which was set up just for to make sure that the retirees had all their rights. There have been different parties with very specialized things, but for the most part, for most of history, there was the Labour Party, there was the Likud, which later became the Likud. It was a number of different. There was the Cherut Party and different parties. They all more or less came together, and there were the religious parties. That was for the most part. There was also the Arab parties and the communist parties, but they were a smaller percentage for much of Israel's history. And that was basically it. And then things began to fracture. So there was the Mizrahi Party, which joined together with, I think, Poale Mizrahi, if I'm correct, and they formed what's called Mafdal. In English, they call it the National Religious Party. There was the Aguda and Poale Aguda that formed one party. In 1992, it split into 2 parties, the Aguda and Degel Torah. Eventually, they joined back together, and they're known as United Torah Judaism. And then Hayidari, together with Rabbi Yosef and some other major individuals in the Sephardi community, started a Sephardi religious party known as Shas. Now, what happened to Mafdal? Mafdal eventually, went through a number of iterations. There is no party called Mafdal in the Knesset anymore. It became Bayit Yehudi, and then Bayit Yehudi became it became very complicated. But for the most part, there were always 3 religious parties. There was the Aguda, or whatever its manifestation was. There was the Mafdal, which was the national religious. And there was Shas, which was the Sephardi religious party. Those are the religious parties. You'd think one religious party would be enough, but of course not. And then there are the left-wing parties, of which there are many. Labor at one point was the largest, and that split off into Meretz, which was actually 3 separate parties that formed a bloc, and it kept breaking up and reforming in different ones. There have been several attempts over the years to form what they call a centrist party, but a centrist party is very difficult to maintain. They've had different ones throughout the years. Eventually, that's what Blue and White was supposed to be, the Blue and White Party, which joined together with Yair Lapid, who had what was essentially an anti-religious secular party. That was his main goal when he was in power. His goal was to defund all of the yeshivas and take away money from the religious, and that was his father's program when he had his party as well. And he says he's going to lock up all the mikvos. That's why they won't have any more children. That'll be the end of them. I mean, it was like really negative stuff. Really, really negative stuff. But those are the centrist parties. So you vote for a party, and then the party is more or less aligned with the left or the right. Yeah. And so blue and white was more or less aligned with the left, and they knew they were going to make a coalition with Labor and with Meretz and with those parties. And the Likud was going to make a coalition together with the religious parties, make a right-wing government. And that was Netanyahu, who was the head of Likud. And he's been in power for a very long time. Well, recently we went through 3 elections. We could not get a majority on one side. It was a deadlock. They kept going back and forth. Now, very complicated party is, of course, Avigdor Lieberman, who's supposed to be a right-wing party, but who hates Netanyahu with such a passion that he will not join with Netanyahu. So he would rather go and join with the left wing, even though his criticism of Netanyahu is that he's not right-wing enough. And that's a mess. And right now, he's not in the government. It's sort of a coalition government. Every week there's another crisis and things like that. So elections are very emotional here, very emotional. In America, it was never that emotional until Trump came in, and then everybody just went crazy. Otherwise, it wasn't so, they used to put up posters over here in Hebrew to get the Americans to vote. So I remember when Bush was running against John Kerry, so there was a big sign, Bush, Beis Vav Shin, Bush, and one Kerry, Kuf Resh Yud. Now, if you know any Hebrew, it basically means that there was an election between embarrassment and Tuma, and ritual cleanliness. Anyway, but it's but here elections become very, very emotional, and tremendous participation, etc. And very often things get deadlocked. But because of that, if there's a party in power and you don't have somebody to go to or somebody who's gunning for you, it becomes a problem. Becomes a big problem how you work around these things. So there is no constitution, but every now and then they pass what's called the Basic Law. And Aaron Barak, when he was the head of the Supreme Court, decided that the Basic Laws form a constitution. He decided this on his own. And he was very much a what they call a judicial activist. And they decided to use the courts to force through an agenda and say this is legal, this is not legal, and they get very into everybody because his position was everything is judicial, everything can be judged. In any event, that's more or less the system here. So. What's the message? The message I want to bring across and to finish this series. There are so many parties. Why can't we just get together? One right wing, one left wing, or one center, either one. One religious party, you know what? So there's a Chassam Sofer that says the following. It says, Jews want peace, non-Jews want to fight. The Chazal. So it says the Chassam Sofer, but you see that non-Jews always get along, and Jews are always fighting. So he says, because there's always two forces that a person has to deal with. He has to deal with peace, and he has to deal with truth. And Jews, given the choice, will always go for truth. And we just can't let go of what we believe to be true. Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkenes, of whom it was said, if you put all of the sages on one side and put him on the other side, he would machriya, he would decide all of them. Yeah, I don't want to say outweigh, but he would decide all of them. That was he was so great. And he had an argument with the other rabbis about an earthenware oven that became tamei, impure, and he had a method to try to allow it, and the sages went against him. And he refused to give up his position. And he was eventually put into shiurim. He was excluded from the community. And I'm thinking to myself, today, so okay, so you open your own yeshiva and you go in contradistinction of everybody and say, I'm smarter than everybody else. He didn't. He walked off the stage of Jewish history. One of the most courageous things that a person ever did. And it's an amazing thing. He could have just given up. He could have just said, whatever. Okay, I was voted in. But he says, I know I'm right. And so I'm going to go with the truth over peace. You ever try to tell a joke to a Jew? Very frustrating. You tell the whole joke and then, I remember I told this joke once and someone says, there's a Jew living on a desert island and he gets rescued. And he shows him all the things he's built, and then he shows him his synagogue, and he shows him another synagogue. He says, why do you have two synagogues? He says, I would never daven in that one. I wouldn't pray in that one. I told this joke over and someone says, that's not how it goes. And he tells the same exact joke, only there's three synagogues. He says, this is the one I pray in. This is the one I pray in when I have fights with the people in that one. And that one I would never pray in. And someone says, no, it goes like this. And I was like, you can't even agree on a joke. Does it really make a difference? Yeah. But okay, listen, we Jews have really tried to maintain truth. So when you come to Eretz Yisrael, things are real serious here. In America, it's much easier to be a contradiction. Mix your metaphors. Take a little from this, a little from that, a little from this. Here in Israel, one person wrote me and they said, you're describing your experiences because you made Aliya and became part of the Haredi community. Could be. In America, I was what they used to call gray. I don't know if they still have this. I was gray. I wasn't black. I wasn't white. I was gray. Come to Israel, there's no such a thing. So I go and I look at the two different schools. And I decided to send my daughters to Beis Yaakov. And once I did, most of my decisions were made for me. Now I knew which newspaper I read. Now I knew which hashgachas I was allowed to eat. Now I knew, everything like that. And what's interesting is the people who went to the Mizrahi school in my building stopped talking to me. Because there's no tolerance. You understand? It's black and white. It's either this way or it's that way because truth is so important. And in America, people are much more easygoing. Yeah. I met somebody, lived in Brooklyn, and I said, listen, in Brooklyn, people don't have this much intensity. Everybody just goes out to eat. You know what I mean? That's what they do. A lot of time going out to eat. She says, what are you talking about? My Rebbe came in from Eretz Yisrael. I went to the airport to pick him up. I said, what'd you do? We went out to eat. I'm generalizing. Obviously, because there are two types of people, those who generalize, those who don't. But I'm a generalizer, yeah. But here, life is very intense. You don't see it so much now, but I remember when. Yeah, you'd be on a bus, and an ambulance would go by, And everybody stopped and looked out the window. Because that's one of my family members. Yeah. I used to remember when the news would come on at the head of the hour, the bus driver would turn up the news and everybody would quiet. Hear what's going on. I told this over once and someone told me I was here in 1953. And they used to show newsreels before the movies. And in the newsreel, they told the story, they showed a film, about a kibbutz up north whose barn burnt down. He says, and the people in the theater were crying. That's the level of intensity. This is a real intense place. It's a real intense place. If you're Zaycha, it's an unbelievable thing. I spent America Pesach to be with my mother. When I came back, I had to give my Motzei Shabbos shir. And I said, in the Haggadah, they darshan all the psukim over there. B'misei ma'at, few in number, as it says, shenemar, b'shivim nefesh, yardam mitzrayim. And each thing it says, shenemar, shenemar, shenemar. Except the first one. It says, v'yardam mitzrayim, anus al pi hadibur. Against his will, because God said he had to. He has to bring a pasuk. And some of the Mepharshim say, because there is no other way to leave Eretz Yisrael except anus al pi hadibur. Because I have to. But to have the schus to live in Eretz Yisrael is an unbelievable thing. And anyone who can, as we used to say in Motel 6, we'll leave the lights on for you. And that's it for this week. And this will conclude my Aliya series. I got to talk about some other stuff. If you want to find out more about the show, you go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com. You can make comments. You can sponsor an episode. I don't have any upcoming events, so you can sign up for the Daf Yomi. We just started Gemara Erevin. You can sign up for the Mesilsi Sharm. A new person just joined. So excited to have them along. We have two of them, one on Sunday, one on Monday, and you just can't get enough of me. Anyway, that's it for this week. I'm Dovid Orlofsky, and this is the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode, and we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah, anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.